Thank you for joining us here. I can just sort of give a brief to my little intro, so maybe we have a little bit more time for the speakers. Again, this occupation response webinar is something that sort of started with the post 9/11 vets caucus within Veterans for Peace. But again, we're very open to collaboration. We feel that the more the merrier. So all of Veterans for Peace really has been helping us, and we're very open to, working with other civil and vet groups. So the more people we get in our tent, the better. Um, so I'll sort of, I guess, get started on the intros here. The agenda today, I'll sort of explain sort of what this is if you haven't had the ability to join us previously. And if you have, welcome again. Thank you so much for spending us here with us on your Saturday. Uh, Anthony Aguilar is going to talk to us here on what's sort of happening in this moment still and DHS as an occupational force. And Joy Metzler is going to talk about us on sort of organizing locally. Marie Purcell, uh, uh, obviously heavily involved in the Minneapolis incursion, confronting ICE there, is going to give us sort of an update and talk more about what's still going on there. And then we're very lucky to have also Jill Garvey from States at the Core on controlling and shifting and controlling the narrative going forward. And we should have some time for a discussion at the end, which people are normally very excited about. I ask that there are no unauthorized recordings, but we are recording this, so hopefully we can share this if you weren't able to uh, join us live. Speak for yourself if you do have the ability to do so and from your own experience. And during the panelist, go ahead and put those questions in the chat. We'll try to get them answered when it's discussion time. So let's see here. This, our focus is really on sort of the brown shirts and their systematic rollback of civil rights and really human rights. Um, and then we're going to do this by reaching as many people as possible in sort of a web-based way, skill sharing. There's going to be some experts, individuals every other month here that will sort of be able to, in a way that is very consumable, digestible, be able to share skills. And then we're going to collaborate with as many people as possible. This is a webinar that is open to be joined and to be worked with all civil and veteran groups across the board. A big shout out, thank you to everyone from Veterans for Peace that has a hand in this and helped us get here. Um, again, lucky to have Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Aguilar here, former U.S. Army Special Forces officer turned whistleblower on the troubling conditions in Gaza and exposing war crimes there. We're going to have Joy Metzler, former conscientious objector who left the Air Force also in protest of the US-backed genocide in Gaza, now focusing on the growing crisis of imperialism and fascism rapidly expanding in the US. Marie Purcell, conscientious objector, and now the Veterans for Peace Twin Cities activist, coordinating rapid response and surge there, but also since that incursion has shifted, uh, it'll be great to hear from her about that. And then Jill Garvey, co-founder, co-director of States at the Core, is focused on racial justice and democracy a very prominent activist there. So, really great program for you folks here today. That's sort of my 5 minute intro here. So we'll maximize the time that we have for our speakers. If you want to go into a little bit more on your background, feel free to do so. Um, and without further ado, or not, that's fine. Further ado, we'd like to hear from Mr. Anthony Aguilar, please.
Hello, everyone. I want to start by saying it is an honor and a privilege to be on this panel with Joy, Marie, and Jill. I absolutely applaud your courage and your continued voices of resistance in what we are facing. In my opinion, is an existential threat to our freedom and to the values of our nation. And as the world and most of America is distracted and rightfully so with this illegal and unethical and immoral war against Iran, things in the home front domestically continue to trend towards authoritarianism and control and nationalization of our sacred elections. And what I think that is important for people to understand is if you look at the um, specifically with the Department of Homeland Security and ICE, ICE continues to operate with high activity in Texas, California, Georgia, Louisiana, Arizona, Minnesota, Washington State, major detention efforts and detention facilities that are being expanded and built in all of the states that I just mentioned and others. And what we really have to look at when you consider how ICE has operated recently, how they've expanded their role without congressional approval, and what legislation is being passed right now that would expand ICE's authorities into our elections directly, state, local, nationwide. Everyone, I'm sure, has heard of the Save America Act. So if you look at the context of the Save America Act, the enforcement mechanism of that act in terms of, excuse me, the proposed bill, it's not yet an act, but the proposed bill to require proof of citizenship, which would mitigate, delineate, and further ostracize many American voters. It's not an act of democracy. It's an act of control and authoritarianism. And the enforcement mechanism for that will be ICE. And if you look at the 2023 to 2027 Department of Homeland Security strategic document, their strategy, the document that the Department of Homeland Security submits to Congress every year to get included into the National Defense Authorization Act, the same authorization act that funds the Department of Defense, Department of State, etc. 169 billion dollars in funding, but also the expansion of the ICE agent force to 10,000 agents, which will make it the largest federal law enforcement entity in the United States. And let's remember, ICE hasn't always existed. Whenever I bring this up about the abolishment of ICE, and I do stand for the abolishment of ICE, not the reformation, not the change or under new leadership, abolishment. And when I say that to people, they say, oh, well, then we'll have no mechanism of immigration. And that's simply not true. America has had an immigration program since 1790. And in that, prior to 2003, when ICE was created under the Department of Homeland Security under the Patriot Act, the United States was considered one of the most welcoming, progressive, positive immigration nations in the world, bringing in some of the best and the brightest from around the world. And what we're seeing now with the integration of ICE beyond just immigration and enforcement, ICE is being transformed and turned into a police state policing agency. The only other word I could describe for it in terms of a special state police, there's a word for it in German, and it's the Gestapo. And when people say that, or when I say that, people think, oh, how dare you compare this to Nazi Germany? Well, it's simply a word. Gestapo is simply a word in German for secret state police. And this is exactly what they are. They can cover their faces. They don't have to produce documentation in their arrests. They can arrest without warrants. They can seemingly operate anywhere throughout the country without jurisdiction. And they do so directly under the authority and at the behest of the president. That is a secret police. And they are expanding. And as the world is distracted with this war, and threats to invade Greenland and Venezuela. I mean, does anybody know what's happened to the president of Venezuela? We haven't heard a peep. You know, in the United States, we are detaining a sovereign nation's president, and we've all but forgotten about it. And that is the strategy of this administration, to distract so we forget, so that we're not paying attention to what's going to happen in our streets, in our neighborhoods, in our communities. And if if Renee Good and Alex Preddy were not enough of a wake up call, that wake up call is going to come hard and heavy when your neighbors are being arrested, when your neighbors are being killed for demonstrating and exercising constitutional rights, when your neighbors exercise their First Amendment and protest and petition the government, which is a sacred right in our Constitution, and then they're labeled as terrorists. This is the strategy. So when we look at what's currently happening, what happened, and what is progressing with the Save America Act, the enforcement or the attempt to enforce various measures at the polls here in the midterm elections, it would not surprise me, nor would I consider it unrealistic to think that our elections in the midterm will be seized and suspended by the federal government, enforced by ICE on our streets. When you look at the expansion of ICE to 10,000 field agents, that's 200 agents in any given state, flexed, surged at any given time. Furthermore, the ability to then surge those forces to any given city at any given time. Imagine that. What we saw in Minneapolis was only a few hundred agents. What we saw in Detroit, in Chicago, in Washington, in Portland, were simply a few hundred agents. Imagine that exponentially magnified by thousands. That is not what Americans want. But if we don't pay attention, it's what will happen, and it's already happening. The further evidence of this that we see the expansion of the tactics that we've seen employed in the West Bank and in Gaza, which I refer to as the imperial boomerang. It comes back to our streets, it comes back to our neighborhoods, is the expansion of ICE's binational industrial research and development program. It's in their strategy. And this program, the BIRD program, codifies exchange training with ICE, the DHS, DEA, CIA, with the Ministry of National Security in Israel. In layman's terms, ICE trains with the IDF. The IDF train with ICE. Whether we're training at the Beersheba National Urban Training Center in Israel, or IDF and Israeli agents are training here in the United States at the Law Enforcement Training Complex in Georgia, just south of Atlanta, also known as Cop City. This is real, and we're funding it, our tax dollars. And if anyone is questioning the expansion of DHS and ICE, or further expansion of the controlling authoritarian measures of the Patriot Act, simply look what's happening in our own country. Look what's happening abroad and what we are importing back home. And it's happening. And we, the American citizens, are the target of that. We, everyday Americans, are the enemy to this administration. And as I look at the expansion of the law enforcement agencies over the last 10, 15 years, more militarized, less control, unrestrained authorities in terms of how they can operate as a law enforcement entity, The United States military is designed and funded to protect Americans, to protect the homeland from foreign threat. Law enforcement is designed to serve and protect the American citizens here at home. And when law enforcement becomes the military, well, then the threat becomes us. And if that's not ever more clear with what we've seen in Minneapolis and in Minnesota in two instances that made national headlines with Alex Preddy and Renee Good, I don't know what that wake up call is going to be, but it's going to be severe. And right now, we have the power to stand through advocacy, through supporting those that are speaking out, those that want change, or we keep our head in the sand and we wait until it's too late. And then the ability to change what's happening will be ever more difficult. So I call on everyone now to be aware of what's happening. Read the Department of Homeland Security's 2023 to 27 strategy. Fiscal year 2027 is right around the corner. Fiscal year 2027 begins October 1st, 2026, which is the end date to have the full implementation of this program that is already funded. So though we see the Department of Homeland Security currently shut down, as they would say, that's just rhetoric that the government is spewing to scare Americans. TSA not being funded. The truth is, TSA is funded in the already existing funds that were already approved. The last bit of DHS legislation or DHS funding that's being withheld for further control by Congress is specifically for the expansion of ICE. So when you see the Department of Homeland Security shutting down TSA and shutting down other entities to make it seem that the big bad Democrats or the opposition is putting Americans in danger, that's not true. All of those programs are funded. It is Department of Homeland Security's choice to not pay them. Why? In my opinion, and from my study of this problem set, and from what I've seen in other countries around the world, I have had boots on the ground in every war that this nation has fought in the last 25 years. And I have seen countries under authoritarian law. I have seen countries under martial law. I have seen countries at their height and fall apart from within. I've been present for some of those. All of the indications of that are what we're seeing here. And if we step up now and we put our energy and our efforts into changing it, we can. But if we continue to ignore it, the ability to change it is going to be much more difficult, if even possible. So that's my take on how things stand right now with ICE and the Department of Homeland Security. Just because we're not paying attention to it as much and it's not in Fox News or CNN or making headlines, it's still happening. And it's picked up its pace and it's right underneath our noses. And it's happening. And this war with Iran serves nothing more than a grand distraction for this administration to continue. It should be no surprise that as soon as the war began and all eyes went to the Middle East is when the Republicans proffered the Save America Act. That's not a coincidence. So stay vigilant, stay alert, stay active, stay involved, and take action to make change, or we're all in peril. Thank you.
Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel. We appreciate that. Um, so if you're wondering what you can do with this, our next panelist, Joy Metzler, is going to speak to just that, what each and every one of us has the power to do.
I was gonna say that lines up pretty well. I don't know if that was intentional or not. I'm gonna drop a one pager that we've put together to forming a veterans community within your own spaces. And Dalton, I was wondering if I could take my questions after my talk, just because I might have to run at the end.
Oh, sure.
Okay, cool, awesome, thanks. So that one pager is that link is good to share with anybody that you so desire, and we encourage you too. We know there's a few people in the call and around who have had experience with this, so Marie would also be able to speak to this a little bit. But also we know that each person's local context is different. So if you're wondering, how do I build a community to meet the moment in my own local context? We hope this one pager helps you start asking the questions that you need to ask in order to start. So the first two questions I always like to tell people to start with for self-reflection, which is really a test to how well you know your local community, is do you know what systems already exist? If no, can you find existing systems or do not exist at all? So in my local context, there were actually very few places, there are very few systems that exist within our local context. So we had to start from scratch. If these systems already do exist, you can ask yourself questions like, do you know how they're organized? Or are they working towards a goal? Or are they reactionary? So if they're reactionary, we do have some pretty reactionary groups in our location that, organize protests around things that happen, but aren't working on the long-term planning. So we all know that long-term strategy is necessary in order to keep the momentum going. But if you do have groups that are already working on long-term strategies, well, what's their ultimate goal? Does it stop short of where you see real change happening? Which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes you need a narrow scope to get work done, but are they working towards the same goal that you want to work towards, or do you need to build something? So that's what that first question is intended to help out with. The second question is, what skills can you personally bring to the community right now, particularly if you're acting as a veteran? So for a lot of us, we have um, combat casualty training, so that lends ourselves really well to being street medics or helping out in that's regards. A lot of us have dealt with high stress and having to make decisions under stress. If you've been through any kind of basic training, you're probably pretty good at handling yourself under stress, so that lends itself well to being a de-escalator, so on and so forth. And before you get fully into it, fully understand your capacity for organizing before starting a project from scratch. So if you think it's going to take X amount of days, double that and add some sort of percentage to it. And that's probably about how long it'll take, being generous. A lot of things do tend to take up a lot of time. So if you're going to start a new project, make sure you're also being honest with yourself about your own capacity so that you can continue moving forward. Consider finding a few allies who are willing not only to organize alongside you, but who are willing to be part of the core planning and for this instrumentation. So we're going to look at a case study, the United Veterans Civilian Response in Seattle, to kind of understand how we build an organized community response. So a little bit of background on UVCR, which their website is in the document that I put in the chat. They started as a veteran response to National Guard and active duty being deployed to our streets. So this was initially meant to be veteran-led because veterans in particular have an advantage in talking to active duty and National Guard. And of course, with the war on Iran, we know that active duty are starting to face this choice where they're being sent into a war that they don't support, that they don't want to participate in which case veterans do also have an advantage in being able to talk to these people. UVCR is self-described as veteran-led, civilian-supported, and they work with other civilian allies such as Indivisible for the civilian support and veterans groups such as Veterans for Peace for the veterans support. So your first step is going to be to determine your objective. You want to set up a response to, and I'm sorry, this one pager is actually very specifically set up for veterans. So if you're not a veteran but you want to do this, just kind of generalize that a little bit. And if you want to talk about anti-war work, if you want to talk about National Guard active duty deployments, I do highly encourage getting veteran support as well, which VFP is happy to provide. It's been part of our core work since our founding. But so you want to determine what your objective is. So if you just say, we want to oppose fascism, well, that's very broad, and you're going to end up doing a lot, and that's not really measurable or achievable, because what does success look like in that case? So in this case, UVCR set their objective to respond to the threat of National Guard and or active duty. So they wanted to end National Guard deployments to Seattle. And of course, they have them wandering the streets, so success would look like them getting out of Seattle. Their second step you would look at is to gather allies. Do you have an existing veteran community? Again, very written for veterans. But this is just kind of general. Do you have community period dot, or is it only you, yourself, and I? If you do have existing communities around you, go and invite those groups into allyship with you. Pitch your objective to them, see how they can support. If you don't already have an existing community, form relationships with other people within your community. So this is something we started from scratch, and this is a non-veteran example. We saw a distinct need for community spaces and gatherings for like-minded people. So we set up what we call a progress hub, which is a weekly meeting where we have different subjects where people can join to talk about ICE response, as well as watch documentaries, do art builds together. And that's not necessarily only a veteran thing either. It's just pulling people who are tired of only going to protests and being mad all the time and giving them a space where they can learn, where they can build together as well, rather than just the very important but very tiring work of tearing down a system. We're also wanting to build up what we want to see in the meantime. Look in your existing activist communities, look in local, I saw people with a Dump Trump hat out in the wild at like a Chow's buffet. Get out of your seat and talk to these people. See if they want to build community. Like, chances are they probably do. If there's no community within the area already, particularly. So with UVCR, Indivisible actually sought out Veterans for Peace and combined forces from there under the UVCR banner. Split the responsibility is the third step. No one person should do everything. You should build out into teams. UVCR actually formed 10 different teams. So they have de-escalation, they have street comms and graphics, they have field feeding. So like giving food, water, transport, food sourcing, so on and so forth. They have finance to deal with their finances, because only some people like spreadsheets, is what I've been told. Not everybody loves Excel. Medical, mental health, recruitment teams, research teams, social media and press, training, design and delivery, transportation. So if one person was doing all of this, it would be so overwhelming. And I'm sure everyone's heard the old adage about 80% of the work being done by 20% of the people. We're trying to even it out as much as possible, because let me tell you, those 20% of people are tired, especially right now. So having these split responsibilities communicated beforehand can help avoid some of that burnout that a lot of organizers have been feeling. And the fourth step is the most important one. Just get out into the streets. Take your model, take what you've built. Don't spend 50 years trying to adjust it, because by the time you get a perfect model, fascism will be here to stay or will have left already. So you need to get out, you need to iterate on your design, and you need to improve it by, trial by fire, so to speak. You want to test it out, figure out where the loose ends are rather than just theorize about where they are. A lot of good social theories are built out in this way, through learning from what has been done, applying new methods, and then reiterating on those methods to create a better method. So you will never figure out what you need to improve on if you don't test it out. Don't be afraid of failure, because at the end of the day, failure isn't actually failure. It's just learning how to do something differently. So UVCR actually maintains a daily presence offering help to their local community, and that can look differently sometimes. So their objectives started out as National Guard response, but they were able to shift and stay flexible with how the times have changed, because all of a sudden National Guard wasn't the priority in Seattle. It shifted to other things, and UVCR's model was built in such a way to where they could flex and change with the times as well. So staying flexible is also very valuable. But you don't, I mean, you won't know if you're inflexible, you won't know how your model fares if you never actually go out and test it out in the real world. So that's kind of a really easy four-step rinse and repeat process that someone can use to hopefully in a broad general sense apply to their own local context, particularly if you're having difficulty building up community. For that second step, gather allies. VFP is here and happy to help out. We know we have a lot of at-large members, and getting them into communities is something that we would like to do, as I'm sure they also are very interested in getting into communities of their own. For me, I was a newcomer to Florida, never stepped foot in this bug mosquito addled state in my entire life. And so when I got down here, I was a little overwhelmed at the idea of finding community. And through kind of going through this like four-step process, I was able to build out my base and find a lot of different groups that I really mesh with and have built really good relationships with. So, like I mentioned, I'm going to take questions now because I do think I'm going to have to run after this. But that one pager is in the chat if anybody would like to reference that.
If anyone has a question, you can raise your hand and I'll unmute you. Any questions? Anybody? Everybody, just a second.
Yeah, the weather is nice, so we have a smaller group here today. So, um,
Hope that means I was pretty straightforward then.
Diana,
I
you
think you
came off of
covered
mute.
it.
Did you want to ask something?
Well, since nobody spoke, I just want to acknowledge, Joy, with everything that's been going on. I almost went out to deploy with y'all, and your kindness, considering all the stress you all were under. And I think kindness in these times, as they say, kindness is an act of resistance. So basically, I just want to acknowledge you and the team's work. Thank you so much.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
Any other questions from anybody? All right. Thank you, Joy.
Oh, Olga has one in the chat. Advice
Oh,
for sustaining efforts given how paralyzed we all feel.
there you
Um,
go.
so something that was told to me is to find and I asked this to somebody in Palestine when I visited the West Bank, because out of everybody who's probably feeling that right now, I'm sure people in the Palestinian liberation movement are feeling incredibly paralyzed right now, particularly Palestinians living in Jerusalem. And this lady was over there, a German lady over there, organizing with Palestinians long term in Jerusalem. I asked her the same question, and she said to start viewing things that we wouldn't necessarily think of as triumphs as movement forward. So when we're like looking for things to feel good about, we want like the really big wins. We want like we want things like big divestments. We want entire companies to divest from Israel. And those are all good objectives to work towards. But if those are the only things we are hoping for, we're going to feel discouraged a lot because those are very big long-term goals. And so one of the things that I try and remind myself that this lady said is that sometimes things not getting worse is a triumph in and of itself. The fact that we are out here mobilizing, the fact that, for instance, we visited Marie up in Minneapolis for a bit, the fact that, their lives are still being made miserable by people out there, showing them the shame of what they're doing every day. The fact that they're being noticed, that in and of itself is a triumph, even though ICE may not have left yet. So it's really it's I don't want to try and be like I want to try and strike a balance here between saying like, it's very valid to feel paralyzed with how shitty everything is, how bad everything is right now. But it's also very valid to understand that our efforts meet, like, even things not getting worse, even things being stalled further out one more day. The complete and total annihilation of Palestine has not happened yet. And I consider that a triumph, because if no one had said anything, we might have seen that happen a lot earlier. So those are the things I try and remind myself of. And then yeah, the long view for us in the Palestine movement, the complete and total liberation, something to look forward to, and also um the holding the celebration that Palestine is still alive, that the culture is still alive, and that people care, and also the grief that things are so bad right now, like holding those together. Um, yeah, but so not to wax too poetic, but that's what I think about a lot. Is that things not getting worse can also can you can also take strength in that.
Thank you, Joy. Uh, really appreciate you. So thank you. I know you probably have to run here soon. We appreciate you so much on this Saturday, and I think that ties in so nicely on what Anthony Aguilar was saying about the focus probably should still be very much DHS, and you spoke about what we can do, and then maybe what we want to see in the future. It probably ties in very well with our next speaker, which is Marie Purcell out of Minneapolis, vet organizer there.
Hello, everyone. A couple of things, I guess, before I start. I'm quite exhausted. I'm coming off a little bit of a period of rest, as well as sort of back-to-back illnesses. And so my brain is a little fried. I feel like my notes they captured what I want to communicate here today, but they're a little they're a little mixed up, perhaps. So I apologize in advance for that. But yeah, my name is Marie Purcell. I'm with our local Veterans for Peace chapter here in the Twin Cities. And I've been doing ICE resistance work with some great intention since August of last year, and was a part of the initial sort of launch of our rapid response network, especially on the south side of Minneapolis, where we were very successful in confronting ICE in our community, and deterring them, which I do believe is ultimately the reason that we saw such an intense response from this particular administration, sending thousands of agents into our streets at the beginning of the year, and resulting in an even greater showing of our community, and a collective courage that I had never really bore witness to in my lifetime. It was really quite amazing. I want to start by grounding us all in the reality that we are all currently under occupation. And this country has been an occupying force since its establishment. And I believe that more and more regular Americans are beginning to understand this. All U.S. enforcement agencies at every level of government, from the full-blown military all the way down to local police departments, do serve the capitalist imperialist project of global domination, extraction, and destruction by a pedophilic, murderous owning class. Like, I know those are big statement to make, but I think it's very important that we stay clear about who our enemies are and what we're not just talking about ICE. We're never just talking about one particular problem that a particular agency is doing. We have to really stay grounded in the larger reality of what we're facing in this country, especially as I believe empire begins to crumble and fall. I do believe that we're on track for that. We must always remember the so-called United States was founded upon and built upon the most extreme of violence imaginable against indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, of Black African peoples within its borders, through genocide and enslavement, and also through the destabilization and mass displacement of peoples of the global majority, especially global South communities. So what's happening here in the Twin Cities? The Trump administration did declare Operation Metro Surge over. But what's really important to know is that the occupation, while some of the numbers that we were dealing with in the thousands in January and February have gone down, those numbers are still in the several hundreds and are multiple fold above the numbers that we were dealing with prior to December 1st when Operation Metro Surge began. So that's one thing. We don't have the bodies. We don't have the level of enforcement agents that we had previously. But what we are seeing is an entrenchment, is a decentralization, and a real building up of infrastructure and equipment. And so they're decentralizing their operations. They're contracting facilities for the decentralization of those operations for administration, for detention. They're bringing in huge numbers of new vehicles and other equipment that would allow them to operate at capacities we are starting to realize that are actually above the numbers that we were seeing in January and February. And I just want to comment on something that Anthony said previously, that we are what I fully believe is that we are looking at a new agency that is being entrenched into our communities, that is not just going to serve as so-called immigration and customs enforcement, but that is really going to be a vehicle for the repression and oppression of our liberties and freedoms as so-called American citizens as well. And so I fully believe that we are dealing with a new secret police state that is quite likened to the Gestapo, that is intended upon quelling resistance and maintaining power of the systems that be. So let me just get myself caught up here a little bit. Some of the other things that ICE is doing that's been sort of a shift in their strategies is that they're going out dressed up now in regular plain clothing. So before they would be all like militarized up, and we saw so many videos and we had so many experiences here in the Twin Cities of ICE agents just looking like fully militarized units on the ground. And we're seeing a lot less of that. They're attempting to blend in a lot more, to disappear into our communities, infiltrate our local rapid response networks, patrols, and neighborhood ICE watches. When we combine what's going on here in the Twin Cities, in communities across the country that are dealing with increased aggression and activities of ICE, with other ongoing atrocities around the world, including the starvation of Cuba, the genocides in Gaza, and now in Iran, and countless other violent imperialist projects across the world, we really need to begin to take seriously what does it mean to move and act and mobilize from a place that will enact material change in our communities. We need to be organizing meaningful economic blockades against the existing power structure, which includes things like general strikes, rent strikes, and moratoriums on evictions. One of the things that we're dealing with right now is we're attempting to both continue to support our neighbors that are in hiding, is that we are facing a situation where those neighbors, having not paid their rent for a period of time, are going to be evicted by landlords and the owning class that owns property. And so we've been talking a lot about how to help them and to protect them and to keep them from being evicted. And what we are seeing is the power structures that be, including big D Democrats, people who are in elective office and running for office, people who are in the nonprofit world and who are in labor unions, are beginning to shift back towards more common narratives of the mainstream, as opposed to these radical narratives that are really grounded in shifting the way that we view some of these things. All of these things are rights. Housing is a right. Healthcare is a right. People have a right to food and safety and the ability for their children to go to school, healthcare. All of these things should be provided as basic rights. And when we have these really extreme situations where everything is very uncovered and it's very clear that the systems as they are not serving us, that is the time to really be driving powerful, radical change-making messages. And instead, we are seeing some shifts. I'm really interested in seeing what some of the dominant narratives at No Kings are. And I'm also very looking forward to hearing from you shortly, Jill, about some of the narratives and stories that we tell and how we can continue to grow our strength and power. Um, so it's probably worth mentioning that some of the more liberal or establishment or people who participate in the systems as they exist that benefit and prop these systems up, kind of returning to or trying to get us all to return to business as usual is not unexpected. And so um, I think that one thing that is helpful for me to ground myself in is that this is a slow and ongoing process of radicalization of our communities to build the necessary power that we need to radically transform our worlds. Um, but when I do look around, I see in my community the like regular everyday people who have been doing ICE resistance work, who have been building strong networks of mutual aid and supporting our neighbors and doing the actual work of community safety and protection are actually quite resistant to this idea of returning to business as normal. In my neighborhood and pockets across the Twin Cities, we have thriving networks that are dedicated to strengthening systems of mutual aid and community defense. And it's so important that we do this because we are beginning to see. I do protective presence at a couple local mutual aid grocery distribution sites in particular. And there are just more and more people every week who are needing to access those services and needing to receive mutual aid. And so it's really important that we continue to strengthen those systems. Um, Thousands of people were radicalized and mobilized over the last 3 months. And what I can say with confidence is many of them continue to behave in really radical ways and transformative ways. So our living, breathing resistance is growing in depth, if not as much and as powerfully in breadth as it has been over the previous 3 months. We're reaching out and connecting with communities across the country to share resources and lessons learned. Events like this one are very, very important. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity, as I said, to be here with all of you and to hear your stories and to hear your perspectives. And so I think I'll probably just wrap with that. Um, and yeah, and I apologize if that was a bit all over the place.
Thank you, Marie. Thank you so much.
Oh,
Uh,
and there is one question. Do you want to wait until the end or answer it?
I
I
can,
think we could go ahead, Marie. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say I can take it now or at the end, either way.
Yeah,
And
go
both,
go for it. I
actually.
think we
I can
got
do
plenty of
both.
time. Yeah, I think we got plenty of time, so we could probably have one or two questions right now.
Mhm.
Go ahead,
Uh,
Markasa.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. And just, what you're focusing on in terms of getting people activated on not just stopping Trump, but like, the bigger changes we need. Whenever, we bring this up in kind of bigger activist communities, there's a hesitation. Like people are like, oh, we just want to be anti-Trump. Like, I mean, I know that there's a lot of anger against the Democratic Party within the party, but I also see that
The
there's a lot of
speaker
folks
was
who are just willing to go with it and go along and just be anti-Trump and not go the next step. Do you have any ideas of messaging, or how do we inform people that we need to go further? It's not just stop Trump, but we need to create the change, the economic change that will prevent a future Trump from coming.
Yeah, so I'm going to start off by saying that you cut out for a period of time, but I think I did capture your question for the most part. So what I'll say is, I think that the way in which the powers that be are currently behaving are doing a lot of the work for us. Everything is very, very uncovered and very apparent right now. One of the things that I've heard from so many regular people is like, excuse my language, fuck the cops. and that from people I would never have expected to hear that from in my communities, because we bore witness to this very intentional and premeditated in many cases, and working through loopholes in others, collaboration between ICE and other police agencies. And so what I think, and we witnessed that, but we also experienced it in our bodies, some of this trauma. And I think that the closer and closer that all of this creeps to every single one of our doorsteps, it's one of the most radicalizing things that can happen, is to have that direct confrontation and to bear witness to it yourself. And so I think that it's upon us to continue to tell our stories and to amplify the contradictions between what we're seeing and what we're being told. So I think that's very, very important. And I also think that equally powerful, if not more powerful, is actually providing the alternatives directly, and showing people where community is being cultivated in new and different and imaginative ways. It doesn't have to be like this, is something that we say a lot. And then we go forth and change it, and go forth and make that change happen. And so we're simultaneously providing our communities what they need to be safe and to thrive, and showing people what is possible. So hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you. And Janet, Will?
Yeah, thanks so much. I have a question about the nonprofit sector and also the philanthropic organizations in Minnesota. I mean, mutual aid is great, but there's something that just sort of sets my teeth on edge when I think of working class and even middle class people, pouring out their own hard-earned money, when I imagine there's some pretty deep-pocketed philanthropies and even nonprofit organizations in your state. So, I mean, have they been approached, or what's your thought on that? Say something more about that, please.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a fantastic question. Thank you so much for asking it. I think that what has become also quite clear over the course of the last several months is that the people who give are the ones that don't have. And that's the beauty of mutual and direct aid. And what I think is very important, and I want to really lift up, is that we need to be cultivating third spaces and places where community is coming together to care for one another, and to get out of this idea of charity, which is I'm going to do for you, because I see myself as someone who doesn't need, someone who is above this.
Well, I
There's an
caught her on her
inherent
way to her
power.
meeting. Yes, she came to see my fight.
And one of the issues with depending upon larger nonprofits and granting organizations, that a lot of them are very entrenched and in bed with the systems as they are, and that includes a lot of like major corporations. There's a number locally here that give out these big, beautiful grants, and they have all these checklist items and things that need to happen in order for funds to be dispersed. And there's just a lot of kind of control and domination of our movement in that way. And the beauty of us coming together to pull together what we need to cultivate and create our own communities is that we then hold the power, and that we have the control over all of that. And so I just hesitate when I begin to think about where we go from here, to look to those sort of established 501c3 nonprofit or like grantor type organizations. I do believe, that said, that we really need to begin talking with some degree of intensity around the importance of reparations, and those that have a significant amount of money and resources and land and other, the owning class themselves really need to begin to grapple with the impacts of being owning class, and what that means, and how that it is upheld and perpetuated. And it is by having classes of citizens below them that are exploited and taken advantage of, and treated quite terribly. And so reparations are also quite important. And I think that we need to have that kind of a conversation with those people who are in like upper and more wealthier classes of like the quote American citizenry.
Back to you, Dalton.
Thank you, Marie. I really, really appreciate your time here. I know you're burnt out. You have experienced it physically in your body, like many of us haven't. We were lucky enough to talk to you at one point when you were physically in it, and just I could sense it. It brought many of us to tears in the last webinar. So again, thank you for everything you do for your community, for us, for the global community. We appreciate you. And with that, I think we're all excited to hear from Jill on the narrative that we can go forward with, which would also sort of tie into confronting Big Phil and shifting that narrative going forward.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm so honored to be here with all of you, with the entire Veterans for Peace community, and Anthony, Joy, and Marie. Really powerful speakers and program you have today. I want to pull a little bit on a few threads, I think, that have come up already. One is this, and maybe this speaks a little bit to Janet's question and Marie's response, which I think is absolutely right. My organization works almost exclusively with community groups, hyperlocal community groups, sometimes some groups working in state coalitions, but we do this because we are explicitly anti-authoritarian, and we are doing direct work to weaken and counter authoritarian movements. And I loved what Marie said about radically transforming our world, and how much her neighbors have talked about not going back, right, to business as usual. I believe that we should not go back to business as usual. We have a window to radically transform our world right now because of the rapid advancement of authoritarianism. It has actually created opportunities for us, right? And so it's a terrifying time. It's complicated. If we talk to Marie and all of the people in Minneapolis and St. Paul and Minnesota who have been through an absolute terror, right, over the last 3 months, we know that the harms are real and they're lasting, and it's horrifying. But there are signs that we have finally made some progress. And what I say is think of as sort of a long march of authoritarianism. So if we think about these authoritarian movements as really being rooted in this backlash to the civil rights movement, we know that this has been sort of what we're experiencing today has been at work for decades. And I really loved Anthony's sort of explanation of what we're facing, because this is actually at the heart of some of the narrative shift that we must achieve, right? So when we're talking about authoritarian movements, they are advancing and consolidating power right now in a lot of different ways. The incursions of federal enforcement into cities is just one way. The ramping up of ICE recruitments is one strategy, this sort of mass deportation strategy, right? But at the heart of all of these strategies is them scapegoating, weaponizing fear, leveraging power over people, right? And there's all kinds of people who are involved in this. So when we're talking about authoritarian movements, we're describing really social and political movements. And they are full of think tanks and private corporations and elected leaders and appointed government leaders and billionaires and far-right patriot groups and white nationalist groups, right? There's just this sprawling sort of coalition of people and groups that are involved. So Trump has been sort of the tip of the spear for the last 10 years. And I think his persona sort of obscures the reality that this is a culmination of half a century of organizing from white nationalists and Christian nationalists and anti-Semitic, Islamophobic, homophobic, xenophobic, anti-Black movements, right? I mean, there's just a real coming together of these movements over the last several years. They're all rooted in this desire to overturn civil rights and freedoms for most Americans. And they have become quite sophisticated in some ways, and they're also can be really decentralized, which has made it very difficult, I think, for the average American to sort of wrap their arms around it. What is this that we're dealing with? And to figure out how to manage what I would say are the lies and the levers that they utilize. So the through line is fear. They utilize fear as narrative leverage, right? Through calls to action and through their justifications for surveillance and power grabs and trampling people's rights. We see this in the dominant storytelling that they do. Their story is that there are invaders, right? And that these invaders to America have un-American collaborators. That's all of us, by the way. Who are trying to steal the country and are the reason people feel destabilized economically or feel like they can't achieve safety, right? That we can blame all of this on these invaders. And if you're only willing to give up your rights and freedoms to a militarized authoritarian government, to a secret police, to allow secret police to roam your streets, you'll be protected from these invaders, right? So that's sort of the justification that they used to operationalize their mass deportation strategy, starting really a year ago. I mean, I'll pick up sort of a timeline and we'll go from May forward, May 2025 forward. They've used immigration as sort of the way that they stake this story into the ground, right? The immigration debate is the vehicle for this larger struggle between democracy and authoritarianism right now. But this isn't about immigration, right? It's definitely not about immigration policy, or reform or safety or crime, right? Because most experts and most people who sort of understand these issues know that none of this lines up, right? I think it goes to Anthony's point that ICE has only existed for a little over 20 years, right? That the US has had an immigration program, but you wouldn't know that listening to DHS, right? If you listen to top officials at DHS or their mouthpieces, you would hear that ICE is absolutely necessary to secure cities across the United States. So it doesn't really matter whether it's real or not, right? Whether any of these things are real or not. The point is they want to leverage fear. And I think oftentimes we get little nuggets of truth from either the administration or people sort of in positions of influence in these authoritarian movements. We heard this several months ago, right? We heard several elected leaders say that they were going to deport 25% of the US population, or 100 million people. Does that make sense? Right? So what does that mean, right? That is sort of coded language, right, to the authoritarian ecosystem that they are going to be cleansing the US, right, of people who they think don't belong here, who aren't American enough. And these are sort of the narratives that we have to call out and we have to counter, but we also have to offer something else, right? We have to offer a way forward. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to talk just for a minute about like how this progressed, because I think Minneapolis is a very, the Twin Cities is a really good example of how the narrative shifted. So back in May, we started hearing Stephen Miller, right, the deputy chief of staff, but really the architect of this mass deportation strategy and policies, and most of the anti-immigrant, xenophobic and white nationalist policies that you see come out of the Trump administration. So he made a call for these like loud, indiscriminate raids, right? Said this should be really, really public. We should be arresting 3,000 people a day. We should be going to Home Depot and just scooping people up out of the parking lots, right? At the same time, very quickly, we saw the cuts to vital healthcare programs and SNAP benefits. We saw the 170 billion through the OBB, big beautiful bill, the 170 billion to DHS to expand its mass deportation plan, right? And then by the time we got into the summer and into the fall, they had been testing this strategy, these big ground operations into cities, right? So we had National Guard deployments, we had surge tactics deployed to various cities across the country. We started to see in LA and then DC the power of documentation, right? Not that documenting law enforcement or civil rights abuses or human rights abuses is new. Black Panther Party, American Indian Movement, right? These are things, this has been around, right? This is a tactic, a First Amendment, an operationalizing of our First Amendment rights. But we started to see something happen in LA. From my vantage point, folks in LA started showing us, we can record all this, we can do it quickly, we can be on the scene, we can get footage of what's happening from multiple angles. And we can beam it out to the world as a way of telling our story of what's happening in our place. What was happening in LA was that it was not paired with, I would say, very fast narrative strategy. So the footage was there, but people weren't exactly telling their stories at the same time. And so DHS and I'd say the bigger sort of ecosystem of authoritarian groups were telling the story of what was happening. Oh, you see this footage? This is what's really happening, right? This is Antifa, these are looters, these are people who are out of control, this is chaos. And they wanted to drive this chaos narrative, and they were still in control of it. That started to shift in Chicago. There was enough sort of documentation done in Chicago that they sort of got put on their back foot in terms of the narrative. I think they had a choice in Chicago. They could double down in force, or they could exit and sort of try to declare victory, right? They decided to exit and try to declare victory. I don't think they actually were very good at declaring victory. I think they exited in a weaker position, narratively. But I sort of thought, okay, I'm in Chicago. I thought like they're going to try to throw in double the number of agents here and see if they can break this swell of community rapid response, right? This swell of community defense. They decided not to. And I think eventually they chose Minneapolis and St. Paul for a few reasons, right? It was smaller. They thought that they had a hook or a little bit of an advantage with the fraud narrative, the targeting by the sort of far right streamers or influencers who were, sort of so-called exposing fraud in the state. And the reality is that they were really wrong, right? The Twin Cities had a lot at its disposal, but it also had something, I think, that we see is evident in other places of the country, which is just this overwhelming desire among regular people to do something about this, right? To protect their neighbors. And I think they certainly chose the wrong city, for sure. I know how tough people in Minneapolis are. I've met them. They're really tough. But they were also they had sort of lost the narrative, and something happened along with the community organizing. And the community organizing always drives everything else, right? Whether the community organizing is run by a bunch of neighbors who aren't paid organizers or experienced neighborhoods, or it's run by people who have some organizing experience, I've seen it happen every which way. It drives what everyone else does. It drives what local philanthropy does. It drives what local governance does. It drives what happens in the judicial spheres, right? And the legal strategy. So this swell of community mobilization was the key to sort of unlocking some of the other things that happened there. All those, I would say most of the people who were out there with their whistles and their phones and were organizing their blocks and their neighborhoods, they were also speaking out in a way that we haven't seen before. And for the first time, we saw a flooding of the zone from what I would say is our side, right? The people who oppose authoritarianism, the people who want to see a radical transformation of our world. This started to swell in Minneapolis. Even from the time that Renee Good was murdered to when Alex Petty was murdered, this was a matter of weeks, 2 weeks, right? 2 or 3 weeks. They called Renee Good a domestic terrorist, right? They tried to paint her and her family and her neighbors as villains. And they weren't successful, but it took a little time to get that uprooted, right? It took a couple days. With Alex Pretty, it took a couple hours. And that means some things were happening, right? The mainstream media went to the same sort of people it calls on about policing, right? Right after Alex Pretty was murdered. The people who'd taken the footage actually like moved away from the scene, or immediately provided some security from their neighbors, right? So that they could speak out and they could give eyewitness accounts. That happened within an hour, right? That is the kind of meta stuff that is happening when you have good narrative work operationalized, right? So Thomas Friedman, I'm not like a super big fan of any probably op-ed writers for the New York Times or whatever, but he wrote, I thought, a very long, good piece about Minneapolis recently. And he referenced something that Stephen Miller said way back at the beginning of this sort of, rolling out of the mass deportation strategy. Stephen Miller was talking to Jake Tapper and said, we live in a world, in the real world, Jake, that is governed by strength, that is governed by force, that is governed by power. And Thomas Friedman wrote, and it sort of made me chuckle because I think it's absolutely real and so simple. He wrote, your private ICE army governed by strength and force was just sent packing by a bunch of moms and dads, armed only with cell phone cameras and whistles, ready to walk out on a freezing morning in bathrobes and bunny slippers to defend their neighbors. That's true. That story also got told many, many times over to the rest of the world, right? And now it is an inspiration for people all over the country. It also means that things get harder for us going forward. They wanted loud, chaotic interactions in places like Minneapolis because they thought that Americans would look at Minnesota, Chicago, LA, and say, oh, these people are out of control. These are big, bad city people. And that didn't happen. So they are moving, I think, Maria, you really, you said this well, they're moving to more covert operations. The enforcement strategy won't stop. They have beds to fill in detention camps all over the country. They have their 100 million people that they want to get out, right? So the enforcement strategy goals don't change. The tactics they use will most likely change. They will focus on less dense areas with quicker raids. They will focus more on traffic stops, jail transfers, courthouse pickups, home raids. They will target journalists and activists, community leaders more, right? They will target vulnerable people more than they already have. Because they want it to be less visible now, because the visibility has backfired for them. And so that means the work of telling those stories is harder. The work of documenting and rapidly responding to this type of enforcement is harder, but it's not undoable, right? It's not impossible. It also means that more and more and more people need to be speaking out. This is like, not everyone can go out and, for example, do ICE Watch, right? Everyone has sort of a different risk profile, but everyone is in some sort of position within their community to do something. And if you're somebody who can be a storyteller, that's incredibly important, I think. It was the difference in Minneapolis. And it doesn't come without risk, right? Lots of people faced pretty severe backlash for speaking out in Minneapolis or sharing their footage. And but if you can do it, do it. And one of the things to think about is really understanding what their script is, which I think I already went over, which is like, okay, their story is un-American invaders, un-American collaborators are trying to steal your country, right? And this is a risk to so-called real Americans. It's a risk to your housing, your material stability, your public safety, so on and so forth. If you give up your rights, we'll protect you and we'll purge them. There's all kinds of ways we can defeat this narrative, right? One way is to say, the first thing to do is to pivot away from their frame always, right? So it's not really about immigrants. Like, hey, we want safe communities, but federal enforcement doesn't make our communities safer. They actually make them more dangerous. Immigrants aren't the invaders, they're our neighbors. And also creating the bigger we, right? What's at risk here are the rights and freedoms for most Americans, for all of us. We don't create the bigger we by saying, but we sort of like the good immigrants, right? Or these people over here that are being targeted are good people and they shouldn't be targeted, right? We don't want to create a situation where we have to pick and choose who gets rights and freedoms. So we really have to integrate all the marginalized people and all the people who are being targeted by authoritarianism into our ideas about what the solutions are. And then we have to show a way forward. We have to actually we have to name it when we win. They failed spectacularly in Minneapolis. They are failing spectacularly at dividing people. The people who are organizing block by block, school by school, they are showing us what democracy looks like. They are the way forward, right? So it's pivot away from their framings, create the bigger we, show the way forward. Okay, I'm gonna stop because I'm probably way over time.
Thank you, Jill. I wouldn't say that I'm a good storyteller. So for a person like myself, uh, pivoting away from the frame and uh, creating the bigger we and showing the way forward, that is something very digestible. Thank you. Thank you so much. So I think we do have a couple of minutes now. I know there's definitely going to be some questions for Anthony Aguilar and others and Joel. So thank you again, everybody, for being here on your Saturday. Let's have some questions or discussion. It's also okay if you don't have a question. We can just discuss some things. I have a few, but I'll probably just hold off because I know there's probably some people in the audience that want to get them out.
You want to raise your hand? You have a question?
Well, I guess while we wait for questions, I might pop my question in here for whoever wants to answer it. My thought is about sports sanctions, the FIFA World Cup in 2026, and then the LA Olympics in 2028. As a way to highlight the abuses here. What we saw that was very successful in South Africa was sports sanctions and sort of that, how that could be a tool. I know that's pretty broad. Maybe for Jill, since it's a narrative thing.
Sorry, I'm looking for my unmute button. Um, yeah, I actually think building out messaging like accountability campaigns is really, really powerful. We're seeing actually a lot of people converting some of their like hyperlocal rapid response. I always call them community defense networks because that's sort of what we got used to calling them in Chicago. But these hyperlocal or neighborhood-based groups doing more and more sort of coordinated efforts across, like, they're really committed to protecting their neighborhoods, but doing some more coordinated effort on campaigns, whether it's like trying to break 287G agreements or corporate campaigns, accountability campaigns. I think this is especially important with flock cameras and surveillance mechanisms, infrastructure that's being um, is growing all the time. There's been a lot of really interesting and good organizing around stopping conversion of warehouses to detention camps. Um, I I think some of this, like I will just say, like, I think labor, right, unions, um, there are still obviously very powerful unions, but like the labor sector is far diminished from what it once was, right? And so I do think to the degree that some of these community networks and the sort of like ideas and energy that's coming out of this community work can help move some of these bigger campaigns, corporate accountability campaigns or general strikes, is really, really important. And some of the stuff starts out, I think, as sort of a wish and a prayer, I would say, like the general strike in Minneapolis on January 23rd, that march was really truly amazing. I think if you had talked to organizers, less than a month earlier, there would have been some concerns about pulling that off, right? Because it's a hard thing to pull off when your city is being besieged by 3,000 federal enforcement agents, right? And I think it took some convincing to get some key union support and sign on to that. Right? I think a lot of that emanated probably from the willingness of community groups to do this. So I'm just a relentless proponent of, and this is why I'm so glad I'm here, because a relentless proponent of this, like either local chapter or local community groups pushing up, right? Even if it means that like you have to achieve, you're aiming to achieve like a big strike or big action against a corporate target. I don't know if that was a great answer or a very specific answer.
Thank you. Yeah, that definitely gave me some ideas of how to go about this big goal of sports sanctions against imperialist uh, sports teams.
I'll
I think,
just also sort of quickly name one other thing, if I might, just to piggyback a little bit, because you named the successes in the freeing in the fall of the apartheid state in South Africa as being really related to um, boycotts, divestments, and sanctions of BDS. And we know that that's a very, very effective way of essentially draining the pockets of the people who are exploiting us in our communities. And we actually have an ongoing boycott of Target, which is headquartered here in Minneapolis, that is, the powers that be tried to throw a wrench in it, but that did not, luckily, did not stick too bad. But we have a lot of people who are also waking up to the idea that the ways in which we spend our money and where we spend our money is one of the most powerful ways that we can enact like nonviolent resistance. And so another thing I think that we need to be talking a lot about is what does it mean to divest from these terrible corporations that are invested across the board in some of the most like horrific war crimes and atrocities imaginable, and begin to shift that money into sustaining ourselves and our local communities and building alternative like hyper local food and housing systems and things like that. And I think that is something that I have really noticed that people are quite hungry for and want to be doing. But right now, we still continue to depend so much upon corporations like I know many people who have to get their groceries at Target because it is the cheapest place to get groceries. And so we also have to face the material realities that people are in. And that's why continuing to strengthen systems of mutual aid and getting people to pay reparations into larger mutual aid funds, those kinds of efforts on the ground that are happening in local communities are so important. And I just want to highlight and lift up the work of my particular neighborhood, which is a very small neighborhood, Bancroft neighborhood on the south side of Minneapolis. And I have not been involved in this particular mutual aid work. But since they started their fund a month and a half ago, I believe now, they've raised almost $100,000 to do rent support for our neighbors. And so this is the kind of things that are possible when we come together in an organized manner, like really clear in our values about where we need to go and what we need to do in order to keep us safe. This is just another example of us keeping us safe. We keep our selves safe physically. We keep our neighbors safe physically from the agents of enforcement, but we also keep our neighbors safe, housed, fed, and cared for.
thank you, Marie. I think I appreciate that. We are officially out of time, but if the panelists would like to stick around for a couple more minutes, just to see if we have any questions, and obviously if you can't, not a problem. This has been a wonderful program so far. Justin, do you see anyone with their hand up? I think Lenore had a question for Anthony.
No, their hands
I
up, but
do,
feel free to jump in. Yes.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I could not find the place to put my hand up. So I wanted to greet Tony. I've been paying very close attention to all of the webinars that you've been on with Diane Sayre, who is an independent running for US president. I thought you might want to say something about the importance of people running as independent candidates right now as a form of hopefully replacing the awful members of Congress, Senate, and the presidency, but also as a means for very widely educating the population. So that's my question and my greetings.
Yeah, based since Veterans for Peace is a nonprofit, I will not advocate or solicit my campaign. But what I will discuss is just third party in general. whether it's independents or non-traditional Democrat Republican Party. Now more than ever is the need for change, and now more than ever is the opportunity to actually see that change. And nationwide, in every state, there are third-party candidates, whether they're alternative parties or independent candidates. And here's the truth in that math, in that in the House of Representatives, the U.S. House of Representatives, if we have just five independent party, non-Republican, non-Democrat candidates that win elections, imagine out of all the congressional districts in America, all we need is 5 to break the duopoly of the Democrat and Republican Party in terms of voting in the House, legislation, voting on the passing of acts and bills to become laws. All we need is 5 to break that deadlock of the hostage scenario that we're kept under, with thinking that our only choices are the Democrats or the Republicans. And if you look at the War Powers Act resolution for Venezuela, that was a 50-50 or a dead equal vote, to which the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, had to then break that tie, who simply just votes by party, not by principle. So in actuality, in any tie break, you're giving it to the Republicans. But just imagine if we had 5. That wouldn't rely upon a deadlock vote being broken by the vice president of whichever party they're in. And you would have a caucus of independent candidates, third-party candidates, that would be the most powerful caucus in all of Congress, because their 5 votes would determine which way a vote goes. And we can do that right now in this country. We don't have to flip the entire House to all independent or third party. We don't have to control all of it. All the independent party caucus would need is 5 representatives in the House of Congress, in the House of Representatives, excuse me. To me, if that doesn't motivate you for change, I don't know what will. It's so easily in grasp to make that change. Just in North Carolina alone, you have a handful of independent and third-party candidates. Nationwide, you have independent and third-party candidates. Now is the time, now is the opportunity, and this is within our grasp to not only vote in change, but to then have real change in Congress like never before. And I would say that anybody that votes third party or independent, your vote is not thrown away. Your vote is a mandate. Your vote is a referendum. And Democrats and Republicans would want you to believe that if you don't vote Democrat or Republican, you're throwing your vote away. And that is absolutely not true. It could not be further from the truth. And we're going to start to see where this Congress has led us in the coming days. Starting this Monday, ICE agents will be deployed to airports nationwide to begin backfilling TSA agents. Let that sink in. Starting Monday, ICE will be backfilling TSA agents at every airport in the United States. If that doesn't scare you in terms of the expansion of ICE as an authoritarian tool, I simply don't know what else there would have to be as evidence to convince you of such. Now is the time for change. and we have the power. And if we do not enact that change now in this midterm election, we may not have the chance to do it. We may lose the opportunity to vote in our country. And I mean that. I'm still not convinced entirely that these midterm elections will go as we think they will in terms of free and fair elections. I fear the expansion of ICE in our elections with the Save America Act. So we have to act. And like I said, all we need is 5 in the House to change the control that we have under the duopoly of the Republican and Democratic Party. And if we don't take this opportunity and we don't enact this change now, we only have ourselves to blame. So let's get out there and make this change, because it's right there on the table. It's right there for us to take. And thank you for that question.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anthony.
Marie or Jill want to react to that? Otherwise, we have another question. No? Okay. Nicholas, Modern. You're on mute.
Thank you very much. I missed the first part of the webinar. I apologize for that. And my question may have already been answered by the presenters, but I live in Northampton, Massachusetts. We have a very so-called liberal politician as Congressman James McGovern. He consistently has avoided talking about the plight of the Palestinian people, about the really astoundingly vicious repression that comes from Israel that the U.S. is part of. And so, in the part of the webinar that I listened to, the focus has been largely, with certainly justification, on dealing with ICE and dealing with our own organization to respond to that. And where do we want to go with organizing as part of this? And I find that No Kings, that Indivisible, and that a lot of the organizing that is to the left in this country is dealing with things within this country. I'm very reluctant to mention what I would say is the exemplary behavior for many right-wing people, exemplary behavior of Israel and its violence, surveillance, and oppression. And I feel like what's happening there is very much wrapped up in what's happening in this country. So how does that message fit in to the organizing that I've been hearing about in the latter part of the webinar? Thank you very much. And I very much appreciate the courage, the insight, and the persistence, relentless persistence in the face of violence and death that people have carried forward in Minneapolis. So I'm not in any way critiquing anything. I'm just asking these questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicholas. Yeah, I mean, that sort of question really could go to anyone. I think that might be our last question here. If anyone feels well equipped to sort of talk again about how DHS and Israel really are interlinked.
Well, I can start off by saying I don't know if everyone here knows this, but ICE has a field office in Tel Aviv. ICE agents are in and among agents, or excuse me, IDF, IOF, Israeli occupation forces are in and among ICE agents. They're ICE agents themselves. It's also worth noting that our own Border Patrol is more than 25% of them are former United States military. And we have seen the levels of brutality that the United States military is capable of in Iran over the last few weeks. And I certainly have my own stories and experiences from my time in the military on deployment to Iraq. What we need to realize is that as much as I hate the concept of the imperial boomerang, it really is quite helpful in helping people to understand that when empire falls, uh, in power and strength and their ability to extend themselves outside of the empire's own borders, it turns inward on itself and begins to exploit and oppress the communities within its borders to an even greater and more alarming degree, because that's where it continues to maintain power and control and domination. And so the United States has been an imperial power since its very first founding, and the conquests and exploitation of the land and taking over people's indigenous people's land, Black Africans being shipped here and exploited and enslaved in order to build this country. That level of terrible, horrible human rights atrocities that was the founding of this nation and has been a through line and continued throughout its entire existence, has been covered up in many ways by a lot of the narratives around American exceptionalism and these ideologies that America is the greatest nation on earth and you can achieve your dreams here. Who can achieve their dreams here? The white supremacist minority that continues to exert control and power and domination over the entire world, but that is beginning to crumble. And so what I like to ground myself in is that we know what these powers are capable of. We have seen it live streamed over the past nearly 2.5 years in the escalated genocide in Gaza. And now we are beginning to see our own government, our own militaries dropping the same kinds of bombs on schools in Iran, and to just begin to uncover the true nature of this country all over again. And so what I think is really important is that we recognize that we have a responsibility, not as Americans, so-called Americans, not just to defend our communities here, but to continue to weaken the empire from the inside as much as we possibly can in order to help liberate all communities, not just our own here at home, but the ones in which our very the companies and the corporations that are producing weapons are right here in our communities. Our neighbors themselves go to work every day in these companies. We need to begin to help them to recognize that that is a choice and that we need to begin to divest from those companies in every possible way and weaken them as best as we can. So that, I guess, would be my response to that. Nick, I do think that we have the ability to radically transform global power systems just by no longer participating. All of this is made up, and we can make up a radically different future.
Thank you, Marie. And thank you, everybody, again today, joining us here on a Saturday. Again, I'm thankful for everybody here, and I feel that I have gained some information here today, some skills, how it all sort of fits together, and what can we do. We've heard some very specific answers on what we can all do going forward. And it's almost like I meet all of my best friends here, and they give me these great ideas. So I feel so tremendously invigorated by the end of these webinars. So to Anthony, to Joy, Marie, and Joel, thank you so much for being here, and all the people that registered and could join us today. Thank you so much, and let's keep up the fight.